You are sitting in the Senate, watching the most powerful man on earth lead your wife away. You cannot move. You cannot speak. Around you, 50 senators sit frozen, their wine cups trembling in their hands. Some are praying she returns. You are praying she says nothing that gets you all killed. 20 minutes stretch into an eternity. When he finally brings her back, he does not simply return her to your side. He sits down. He pours himself wine. And in front of everyone you know, he calmly describes, step by clinical step, exactly what he did in that room. Your colleagues stare at their plates. Your wife stares into nothing. And you must smile. You must nod. You must thank him, because the alternative is watching your children die. This was not madness. This was machinery that a system built with surgical precision to dismantle the human soul, and the man who engineered it learned every piece of it while watching his entire family get erased by the previous emperor. His name was Caligula. What he did to Rome was not merely cruel. It was organized evil. So methodical, so psychologically destructive, that 2,000 years later historians still struggle to understand how one man could design terror at this scale. If you believe the darkest truths of history must be remembered, consider subscribing. What follows only gets worse, because the most frightening part is not what Caligula did. It is that the system he created outlived him. Before we examine the 5 acts of his terror machine, you must understand something critical: that he was not born a monster. He was built, and that process began when he was a child. The year is 14 AD. A boy, 6 or 7 years old, runs through a Roman military camp wearing a miniature legionnaire uniform, tiny armor strapped to his body, little red boots on his feet. Hardened soldiers who have conquered half the known world laugh, lift him into the air, and cheer. They call him Caligula, Little Boots. He is the son of Germanicus, the greatest general Rome had produced since Julius Caesar. The army worships his father. They adore this child that he becomes their mascot, their good luck charm, their symbol of victory. The boy grows up believing he is untouchable. 1 year later, his father dies. Official cause: sudden illness, whispered cause, poison, ordered by someone close to the emperor, perhaps the emperor himself. Caligula is 8 when the machine begins to destroy his family. His mother is dragged from their home and charged with treason. His eldest brother is imprisoned and starved until he tries to eat the stuffing from his mattress. His second brother is exiled to an island where guards torture him until he smashes his own skull against the walls to escape the pain. 1 by 1. His world is erased. BY 19. Caligula is the last living member of his family. Then the summons arrives. Emperor Tiberius orders him to Capri, a beautiful island fortress where the emperor has isolated himself from Rome, the Senate, and any form of accountability. Ancient historians, Suetonius, Tacitus, men writing within living memory, describe Capri as a palace of nightmares. Tiberius has grown paranoid, depraved, obsessed with astrology and flattery, inventing new cruelties simply because he is bored. And into this environment walks a teenage Caligula. He knows Tiberius destroyed his family. Everyone knows it, but he cannot show it. Not grief, not anger, not even sorrow. 1 wrong glance, and he dies. So he does not merely survive. He becomes perfect. Suetonius later writes something chilling about the boy who will become emperor. There was never a better servant, or a worse master. Caligula learned to bury everything human inside him. He watched, he studied, and he became exactly what Tiberius wanted: obedient, entertaining, harmless. For 6 years, he played the role perfectly. Then, in 37 AD, Tiberius died. Some say it was natural causes. Others whisper that Caligula hastened fate. Either way, the 19-year-old hostage suddenly became the most powerful person on earth. Rome celebrated. They believed they were welcoming the son of Germanicus, the beloved general. They had no idea. They had just crowned a man who had spent 6 years learning how to break human beings from the greatest monster in Roman history. For 7 months, everything seemed perfect. Then Caligula fell gravely ill. When he recovered, the man who awoke was not the same as the one who had gone to sleep. What happened during those fevered days will never be known, but something inside him had shattered. Rome was about to witness the dark system he had been hiding. What followed was not random violence, nor the acts of a madman. Caligula had built a deliberate machine, 5 distinct acts of psychological warfare, each designed to destroy a different part of the human spirit. And the terrifying part was how methodical it was. The first act of the machine was the cult of the sister goddess. Caligula had 3 sisters, but Drusilla was different. Ancient sources describe a closeness that even Rome found uncomfortable. Whether the rumors were true or propaganda hardly mattered. The empire believed them, and Caligula encouraged the belief. When Drusilla died, he did not simply grieve, he weaponized mourning. He had the Senate declare her a goddess, with temples built for her worship, and then he instituted a period of mourning so severe that it became a capital crime to laugh, to bathe, or to dine with one family. For weeks, perhaps months, any sign of joy could be punished with death. Every moment of happiness became a potential sentence. Caligula was forcing the entire empire to feel his personal pain. In doing so, he discovered that he could legislate emotion, criminalize happiness, and make his inner world the reality of others. Once he realized his power, he began testing how far he could go. The second act was a palace of humiliation. Ancient historians remain divided on whether this was fact or propaganda, but they agree on the scope of its cruelty. Caligula turned part of the imperial palace into a public instrument of degradation, targeting not the poor, but the families of Rome's elite, the senators, the governors, the military leaders. Heralds announced his decrees in the streets. Names, ranks, and family lineage were subjected to public scrutiny and humiliation, meticulously recorded in ledgers. For Rome's nobles, whose identity was built on honor and ancestry, this was unbearable. They could do nothing, because resistance meant execution. Caligula was not just taking control over people's lives. He was dismantling the very foundation of their identity, proving that no one, not even the proudest aristocrat, could stand against the system. Caligula wasn't done. He realized something crucial. Public humiliation was powerful, but private humiliation witnessed by others was even more devastating. This brings us to Act 3 of his machine, the banquet of predation. Picture the scene. You are at an imperial banquet, surrounded by senators and their families. The air is thick with tension, the wine tasting like fear. Caligula rises, and everyone falls silent. He walks slowly between the tables, observing, evaluating. When he stops at your table, you know that nothing you do can change what is about to happen. Conversation dies mid-sentence. Forced smiles falter, and everyone waits, pretending the moment is ordinary because any show of objection could mean death. For you, for your family, for anyone you love. Time stretches. Minutes pass like hours. Finally, what was taken is returned. The person sits silently, unwilling or unable to meet your eyes. And Caligula sits too, in front of everyone, friends, colleagues, rivals. He recounts the events, analyzing, mocking, and drawing everyone into complicity. You must smile. You must nod. You must behave as if this is normal. The act is not only about humiliating one person. It is about shattering the social bonds of Rome, making everyone a witness to and participant in each other's degradation. And we are only at Act 3. Act 4, the grieving father, is even more calculated. Caligula begins executing people not for crimes, but for his own amusement, curiosity, or whim. He develops a protocol. If a son is to be executed, the father must witness it up close. One recorded incident by the historian Suetonius reveals the cruelty of this system. A father watches his son executed, and that very night, he is brought to dine at the imperial table. The body is still warm. Caligula studies him like an experiment, searching for any sign of grief, any flicker of humanity. If the father reacts, he knows the man has not yet been broken. The father sits, eating food he cannot taste, speaking words he cannot hear, while the executor of his child watches him, analyzing every expression. Caligula is not only taking a life, he is taking the parent's right to mourn, turning the bond between parent and child into instruments of terror. Each act builds on the last, systematically destroying not just individuals, but the very humanity of everyone around them. Caligula had turned the deepest human bond, that between parent and child, into a source of terror instead of comfort. Love itself became dangerous. The more someone cared, the more vulnerable they were, the more he could manipulate and destroy them. And yet, the machine had a fatal flaw. While Caligula spent years terrorizing senators and noble families, people trained to accept humiliation, who could rationalize suffering as a cause of survival, he aimed his casual, everyday cruelty at the wrong kind of person, a soldier. This was Act 5 of the machine, the wrong man. His name was Cassius Chaerea, a senior officer in the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite personal bodyguards. These were men trained for violence, armed and lethal, standing inches from the emperor every day. And Chaerea had one characteristic that Caligula found endlessly amusing, a high-pitched voice. Every day, Caligula mocked him, creating elaborate jokes and humiliations, small, deliberate cruelties. When Chaerea came forward to give a daily password, a routine military procedure, Caligula would assign him ridiculous, mocking words. For the emperor, it was throwaway humor. For Chaerea, each insult was a drop of poison. Caligula had miscalculated. Senators could survive humiliation because their wealth, families, and legacies gave them reasons to endure. Soldiers like Chaerea had no such constraints. They were trained to fight, to kill, to defend, and now they understood that life under this emperor was unbearable. And then, in less than a minute, the machine collapsed. January 24th, 41 AD, Caligula tended the theater, in good spirits, preparing for a play later that day. Around midday, he decided to leave through a narrow underground corridor connecting the theater to the palace. Dimly lit and claustrophobic, the passage was a perfect trap. Waiting in the shadows were the conspirators. Chaerea stepped forward as the emperor approached. Caligula, confident in his invincibility, sneered and offered a mocking response. That was the last thing he ever said. Chaerea struck, driving his sword under the emperor's ribs. Caligula stumbled, trying to escape, but the corridor was narrow. Conspirators blocked both ends. Within seconds, he was overwhelmed. Ancient sources record 30 stab wounds, 30 times that terror and cruelty met its end. 4 years of accumulated fear, humiliation, and violence released in a single, frenzied moment. But the machine did not stop with Caligula. In the aftermath, the conspirators sought to erase everything connected to him. His wife, Caesonia, aware of what had happened, begged for mercy, but they killed her. Then they went to the nursery. Caligula's young daughter, Julia Drusilla, only 2 or 3 years old, was murdered. Any potential for revenge, any connection to the past, was destroyed. The system Caligula had built, when it broke, did not merely collapse. It devoured everything around it. For a few hours, maybe an entire afternoon, it seems like Rome might actually change. The Senate gathers and debates. Some want to restore the Republic, to abolish emperors and return to the old ways. For the first time in generations, there is genuine discussion about what Rome could be, and then the Praetorian Guard makes a decision. While the Senate talks, the guards are looting the palace, taking jewelry, coins, and anything of value. One of them hears movement behind the curtain. He pulls it back and finds a man hiding, middle-aged, trembling, with a stutter and a limp. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, long dismissed as a harmless fool, probably weakened by childhood illness. But the guard does not see weakness. He sees a new emperor. They carry Claudius to their camp, proclaiming him ruler. And while the Senate is still debating the Republic's future, the army has already made its choice. The machine survives. What haunts me about this story is how brief Caligula's reign was, less than 4 years. In the scope of Roman history, almost nothing. A blip, a footnote, and yet, 2,000 years later, we are still talking about him. Why? Because Caligula proved something terrifying about power. He showed that a state's machinery, its laws, military, economy, bureaucracy, could be turned into instruments of personal psychological warfare. He didn't work outside the system. He made the system his weapon. The ledgers in the imperial brothel, bureaucracy doing its job. The forced mourning for Drusilla, law enforcement doing its job. The banquets where he humiliated senators and nobles, imperial hospitality doing its job. Every atrocity he committed was technically legal because he was the law. And when he died, the system didn't die with him. It simply found a new operator. That is the true horror, not that one man was a monster, but that the machine he built kept running. Nero burning Rome and blaming Christians, Domitian executing anyone who dared look at him the wrong way, Commodus forcing senators to watch him fight in the arena, Elagabalus doing acts so disturbing we barely remember them. All of it followed the blueprint. Caligula revealed a truth about absolute power that Rome could never unlearn. When one person controls a military, the law, the economy, and the culture, there is no mechanism to stop them. No checks, no balances, only waiting for them to die or be killed. And even then, the system finds someone new. Suetonius wrote that Caligula was the best of servants and the worst of masters. He learned tyranny by pretending to be the perfect subject. He studied under Tiberius, watched the monster operate, learned every psychological tool, and then perfected it. That is the warning. The greatest threats don't announce themselves. They learn. They adapt. They wear the mask of loyalty until they no longer need it. When Claudius became emperor, he destroyed most of Caligula's records, ledgers, correspondence, official documents. The histories we have today, from Suetonius and Tacitus, were written decades later from memories, rumors, and fragments. Which means everything I've told you about the 5 acts, the systematic terror, the machine, that's just what survived. Imagine what else was lost. Imagine what was so disturbing that even in an empire that crucified thousands and fed people to lions, they decided it must be erased. Caligula ruled for 3 years, 9 months, and 8 days. In that time, he built a machine that showed every future tyrant exactly how to destroy human beings, psychologically, systematically, completely. And the blueprint never disappeared. It's still out there. Which leaves us with one final question.